So Julian Assange, as we reported last week, he got, he obviously got arrested. So he got arrested, I think it was in April, I believe. April 11th, I believe, or April 12th. He got arrested in the UK. He was in the UK, I believe it was the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK. And he ended up, after years of being in that Ecuadorian embassy and starving and, being held, kept in, a certain small room where he could never even leave. He has been arrested, taken to the UK, taken in by UK authorities, and this is after, again, like I said last week. So yeah, like I said, like I covered last week, he has been charged with 17 counts of the Espionage Act by the United States. But the United States, luckily, which is a good thing, the United States has not captured him yet. But unfortunately, the UK is doing the United States' dirty work for them, and they are treating him horribly, from what reports are coming out apparently from his lawyer, and as well as a lot of independent reporters. So I'm just going to read this article here from NBC News. The title says, Julian Assange is showing symptoms of psychological torture, expert says. The Wikileaks founder, quote, lives in constant panic. Imagine being in a nightmare and never waking up, according to the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. That was the subheadline of the article. So let me just go through this a little bit here. It says Julian Assange has been left in a state of extreme stress, chronic anxiety, and constant panic after spending 7 years holed up in London's Ecuadorian embassy. A leading United States nations expert who visited the Wikileaks co-founder in prison said Thursday. Niles Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, on torture, told NBC News he blames the United States, United Kingdom, and Sweden for ganging up on Assange and subjecting him to psychological torture and collective persecution while he was inside the embassy. You talk with him and he is extremely agitated. He had all these questions. What's going on there? What is in this legal proceeding? And what's going to happen here? The UN official who has been working informally with Assange's legal team said. He's so preoccupied that he will bombard you with questions without waiting for answers, Melzer said. Assange fled to the embassy in 2012 to avoid extradition to Sweden to face allegations of rape and sexual assault. Critics pointed out he was free to walk outside and face justice whenever he wanted. But Assange and his supporters claim he was forced into exile to avoid extradition to the U.S., a belief supported by Melzer. Assange is currently being held at London's high-security Belmarsh prison, having been hauled out for the embassy. Being held out of the embassy in April and sentenced to 50 weeks for skipping bail. The U.S. has since announced it is charging Assange with 17 counts under the Espionage Act of 1917, which critics say has potential free speech limitations. In a telephone interview, Melzer said that if Assange is extradited to the U.S., he faces what amounts to ill treatment or torture, such as prolonged isolation, sensory deprivation, and solitary confinement. He faces up to 175 years in prison if convicted of all charges. Quote, there is this intelligence cooperation between Sweden and the U.S., which is very important for Sweden and their own defense strategy since they evolved away from neutrality in the 1990s. Melzer said, Sweden has been very forthcoming in cooperating with the U.S. in those years. Asked by NBC News to respond to the allegation that its investigation of Assange was disproportionate, the Swedish prosecutor's office declined to comment. By the way, a lot of the charges that are being accused, or that are being made against Julian Assange just in Sweden alone. So when it comes to the rape charges or apparently he raped an underage girl or something, apparently those are bullshit. From everything that I've heard, there's been nothing that shows actual legitimate evidence of that actually happening. A lot of it is just, it's made up, and they just think it's a way for critics. I think a lot of critics out there, they just think that it's a way for Assange to suffer more more persecution and more, blowback for the great things that he's done as far as exposing the U.S. government, and I think to many extents, the UK government, and just like exposing a lot of corruption that has gone on all over the world. So all these different countries, like they said, Sweden has worked with the United States very much in making sure that he gets punished and everything. So that's why they're making these charges. Obviously, the U.S. charged him with the Espionage Act. The UK has him, in solitary confinement. They arrested him, put him in solitary confinement. So everybody's making sure that Assange suffers as much as possible for the fact that he exposed corruption, which is amazing. I mean, I can't even believe that that's being allowed. Let's see, and it's also a good point to point out that the Swedish prosecutor's office declined to comment on the story because they know, I guarantee they know deep down that those rape charges against him are bullshit. So if they have to respond for that, they don't want to get into the details of it because they know, it's baseless. There's nothing there to actually make a case against Assange other than the fact that he again exposed corruption. And they agreed with the United States that we're gonna make sure to throw the book against this guy, and then America obviously supports that and they're okay with that. So anything to make sure a free speech hero and an actual journalist is basically tortured and put through hell for what he did. It says here, the investigation of sexual assault against Assange expired in 2015 because it exceeded the statute of limitations. The investigation of rape was dropped in 2017 because officials said it was impossible to pursue Assange while in exile. They reopened that case after his arrest last month. How the hell are you allowed to do that? If the statute is gone, how can you reopen it again? How weird. On Thursday, Assange missed a court hearing because his lawyer said he was too ill to appear by video link. Melzer visited him on May 9th, accompanied by 2 medical professionals specializing in the impact of torture on detainees. He shows it says he, quote, shows all the signs that are typical for a person who has prolonged exposure to psychological torture, including extreme stress, chronic anxiety, and intense psychological trauma, Melzer said. You can see that that's someone who lives in a constant state of panic. Basically, it's a bit like imagine being in a nightmare and never waking up. The UN rapporteur, I don't know how to say that word, is also a professor of international law at the University of Glasgow, which is in Scotland, human rights chair of the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, and previously worked as an advisor to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Yeah, what a good guy. It's quite a good resume right there. So it's good that he's representing Assange. A good person representing another good person. It says, in a UN statement released Friday, Melzer said he believes there has been a, quote, unrestrained campaign of public mobbing, intimidation, and defamation by the United States, Ecuador, and Sweden to get Assange extradited to the U.S. Other experts say that Sweden's reopening of the rape case complicates this supposed aim. What do you mean complicates? That just means, if anything, that reiterates the aim. It says Melzer has written to all 4 governments asking them to refrain from further disseminating, investigating, or tolerating statements or other activities prejudicial to Assange's human rights and dignity. Dignity. In 20 years of work with victims of war, violence, and political persecution, I have never seen a group of democratic states ganging up to deliberately isolate, demonize, and abuse a single individual for such a long time. Yeah, that's a pretty crazy thing that's happening. That's quite a development for Assange, and kind of had that fear because all the way since the time that he was in that Ecuadorian embassy, apparently he was really being kept, he was being kept in like very, very difficult like conditions. Apparently he wasn't like able to eat very much or drink very much. I think that I heard some stories about that. So yeah, that's, I mean, if that's, shit, if it's to the point it is now that they're saying it is, that's pretty bad because not only is his arrest a violation of free speech, First Amendment, all that stuff. I mean, First Amendment obviously is in America, so I don't know if other countries care about the First Amendment, but I mean, or as far as, freedom of speech. But I mean, in general, free speech is under threat, regardless of how you want to look at it, when it comes to the arrest of Assange. And the fact that, these countries like Sweden, even Ecuador, the fact that they're willing to take part is very unfortunate and very, I mean, they should be called out for it. And, there's a lot of protests going on. I'm not sure where they're coming from. I know a lot of them are coming out of the UK for sure. But, wherever these protests are taking place, they're definitely taking place in a lot. They're definitely taking place a lot more in European countries. I wouldn't be surprised if they were taking part in Sweden as well. But there's a lot of people, regular people, not government, the heads of governments, at least. I think the only head of government, or at least the most prominent head of government that I can remember that spoke out in favor of Julian Assange, and I'm saying like specifically mentioning Assange, was the leader of the opposition in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn, who's trying to become Prime Minister of the UK. And he's the only person that has really, the only prominent person out there, prominent politician, prominence, not just politician in general, because there's other politicians in America like Tulsi Gabbard and Mike Gravel and all those, Bernie Sanders, he gave a very, very tepid response regarding the charges being brought against Assange. I don't think he actually mentioned Assange's name, but he did say something about the actual violation of free speech, which is good. But Bernie's response was very tepid compared to Tulsi Gabbard, who said she would, Tulsi said if she was president, she would actually pardon Julian Assange, would pardon, Edward Snowden and everything, So, I mean, there's certain people that just have the balls to, to stand up for those things. Now, if you stand up for those things, in the United States, you're basically portrayed as being like pro-Trump and anti-United States, and it's like total fear-mongering. And especially with the fact that Assange exposed Hillary Clinton during the 2016 elections and showed, various cables and stuff, and showed her speeches that she gave and statements that she made that she didn't want to be released and everything, stuff about the DNC and whatnot, and everything about like Seth Rich, who, as we discussed, I think it was last week, about how Seth Rich was, he was basically identified by Julian Assange to be the person that gave the information about the DNC corruption and stuff. And so, which, if many of you, may not know, Seth Rich was a former operative that was working for the DNC, and he apparently exposed the DNC, or apparently spoke out against the DNC, about the corrupt things that they were doing, and then gave information to WikiLeaks and Assange. Assange, again, identified him as being that, and then he was found dead. He was found dead, shot in Washington, D.C., but then his, none of his possessions that were on him were taken. So apparently somebody just randomly shot him and just ran away without taking his wallet, without taking apparently an expensive watch he had on, and yeah, so a lot of questions surrounding Seth Rich's death. A lot of questions, obviously about the DNC's corruption and everything. But so my point is that when people come out in favor of what Julian Assange did and exposing the DNC and stuff, they're seen as like, well, you're anti-democratic party, and because Trump said thank you WikiLeaks or whatever, I think he said that in 2016 about how WikiLeaks exposed Hillary Clinton. So now everybody claims that Julian Assange was pro-Trump. That was never the case. Julian Assange has never been pro-Trump. Just because Trump says he loves Julian Assange or WikiLeaks or whatever does not mean that WikiLeaks loves him. And the fact that Donald Trump's current American government, U.S. government is charging Julian Assange with 17 counts of the Espionage Act on baseless terms, as I detailed in the last episode last week. That completely disproves any claim that that Julian Assange is pro-Trump. Just because he exposes Hillary Clinton does not automatically make him pro-Trump. And just because Trump says he loves WikiLeaks doesn't mean that WikiLeaks loves him. So it makes no sense. So all these people that are making these claims, it's just like it's a bunch of just bullshit. But anyway, but the psychological and physical torture, all these things that the potential psychological and physical torture that Julian Assange is going through based on what this gentleman said is very scary. And I hope Julian Assange is going to be okay. It's very unfortunate what's happening to our free speech advocates out there, to people that are standing up for these things that a lot of, honestly, that our own government won't stand up for, whether it's journalists that are being journalists like Julian, it's not real journalists that are being detained, whether it's journalists that are part of like mainstream or whatever various publications and whatnot, whether they're going through it or whatever. It's horrible. Because at the end of the day, free speech is everything in this country, for sure. I mean, that's so important for the fabric of this society. And hopefully Jeremy Corbyn becomes prime minister, because if he does, then he's gonna. I think there's definitely going to be a possibility that he would, he would try and get. He would basically try and maybe put Julian Assange in kind of a protective exiling, so that he's not, he's not basically extradited to the U.S. and all that stuff, because Jeremy Corbyn is not fond of the United States, never has been. Him and Bernie Sanders are very similar ideologically wise, and I don't know if Bernie Sanders would refuse to like charge Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, all those types of people, those whistleblowers and stuff. But Bernie Sanders definitely does believe in free speech to some extent. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does if he were to become president, if he were to, he were to be the nominee and, something were to happen to Julian Assange, what he would say and stuff. So again, he didn't give a very good response to the Julian Assange, charges. And he just kind of mentioned free speech and freedom of press to kind of in a general standpoint. He never said Assange's name as far as I know. So we'll see what happens with Assange. I hope for the best for him. I hope he doesn't go through any more torture than he already is. We need him around. We definitely need his existence out there so that he can put the pressure on more on journalism and more countries to stop the corruption that they're taking part in, because they obviously think they can get away with it. And the less Julian Assanges we have out there, the more they're going to be getting away with stuff, and the more they're going to know that they can do whatever they want and nobody's going to call them out. So here's to, knock on wood that he's going to be okay. So progressives and, libertarians and left libertarians and libertarian socialists, all those people out there that are, in favor of freedom and in favor of freedom of speech, free press and all that stuff, we're going to be backing and supporting Julian Assange the whole way.